Welcome to the Wisdom of the Body Summit, an online event to align with your body's intelligence for healing, optimal living, and spiritual awakening. Brought to you by Sounds True. Throughout this summit, 32 experts will share practical tools and breakthrough insights that have emerged from the convergence of science and time-honored perspectives from the world's spiritual traditions. As we learn to recognize and honor the incredible wealth of knowledge that lies within our bodies, we can begin to listen and attend to ourselves more fully, opening a doorway to greater health and well-being. Hi, everybody. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome author, speaker, midwife, and Yale-trained medical doctor, Dr. Aviva Romm. As one of the world's foremost herbalists, Aviva has been bridging traditional wisdom with modern medicine for more than 3 decades. And today, I'm really excited to be in conversation with her. We're going to talk about fear to freedom, perfectionism to peace, unlocking the emotional and adrenal roots that are keeping you from living the life you want and taking chances on your dreams. Welcome, Aviva.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is going to be a good conversation.
It'll be fun.
Let's just dive right into the conversation topic. Moving from fear to freedom and from perfection to peace and the adrenal roots. Let's talk about the adrenals. What does it mean?
So the adrenals are 2 tiny little organs. They're like these little yellow pyramids that sit on top of your kidneys. In fact, they're so small that I remember being in my first kidney surgery as a medical student and knowing how powerful they were at maintaining our survival and saying, that's it? Like I just, like one of those towns you drive through and you missed it. It felt like that. But what they do is literally and truly, as part of a system that connects your brain to your hormones, totally support your entire survival, from everything from keeping your blood pressure up to maintaining your blood sugar to keeping you alert to danger in your environment, keeping you from going into shock, fighting inflammation. I mean, there's pretty much no aspect of your survival as a human being that the adrenals don't have a touch point in. The other thing they're part of is regulating how much and how quickly and how well we react to stress and regulate our emotions. So that's where the fear piece comes in.
Also, with the adrenals and being stressed out so much, how can we really become attuned to what's happening in our bodies when there's so much competition from the outside for all of our energy and all of our, life force?
Yes, it is a very distracting world, and it's distracting with a lot of things that promote stress and promote anxiety very specifically, whether it's distraction from the bills or distraction from something on the news or distraction from something you're comparing and despairing about on social media. It's everywhere. Our kids, our relationships, it's so prevalent. So for me, what I find to be the most helpful tool is actually what a therapist I know calls dropping in. And it's literally dropping into your body with your focus and your mindset. So a lot of us spend a lot of time, what I say, between our throats and our heads. We're talking and we're thinking and we're worrying, and we're not spending a lot of time feeling how we feel in our bodies. A good example is when I ask women what they ate for breakfast that day, and they'll say, I don't remember. Like they wolfed it down. They were so busy on the way to work, eating at the, in the car behind the dashboard, and they didn't even taste their food. Or people who just aren't even aware when they are getting stressed out or anxious. And yet all the symptoms that our bodies give us when we are stressed are signs that can tell us that something's up, like something is off in our environment. And these are things like starting to pay attention to when you feel your shoulders are up near your ears, when you feel like your back is tense, when you catch yourself not noticing if you're even breathing, if you're having a lot of thoughts, a lot of worry thoughts, that's actually a sign that this stress response system is getting activated. For women, low blood sugar can be a symptom, like you're just shaky and you're hangry because you haven't been paying enough attention to your body to recognize when you're hungry. A lot of us don't even know when we're thirsty or tired. So starting to just take some time every day to drop in and pay attention to how you feel in your body is the first step. One of the things I sometimes encourage my patients to do is actually use their smartphone wisely by using it as an alarm reminder. So for women who are, or people in general who are struggling with not being in touch with their body, if they're stressed out a lot, feeling overwhelmed a lot, have anxiety, have trouble sleeping at night because they're so wound up, is actually to set their smartphone for about 15 minutes before they wake up in the morning, and then have another alarm that goes off at the time they need to get up. So when that first alarm goes off, you can actually set it to go off with a little bit of gentle chimes or some music. I know it sounds very woo-woo, but it really works. And that's kind of like your reminder to just wake up gently and spend a little time doing some deep breathing, a little meditation if you like meditation. Then when you get out of bed, kind of start your day a little bit more slowly than you might be used to. Then have another smartphone alarm set for maybe mid-morning, like 10 o'clock in the morning. And again, that's a little check-in time. Am I paying attention to my body? Do I need a bio break, which is a nice way of saying, do I need to go to the bathroom? Do I need to get up and move around a little bit? We end up sitting for 8-10 hours a day sometimes. So that little bit of a check-in. And then another couple of hours later, have an alarm set. Again, do the same thing. Again, mid-afternoon. A lot of people, especially women, are very familiar with that mid-afternoon crash. You get hungry, you start jonesing for the coffee or the chocolate or the carbs. And instead, what you can do is have an alarm set. If you usually get that crash around 3 o'clock, set an alarm for 2:30. Get up, get outside if you can. Again, hydrate. Have a high protein, high quality fat snack like some nuts or an energy bar, and that can really forestall that. And then, you kind of set a rhythm through your day, and that rhythm actually physiologically starts to reset that stress reaction because you're resetting your circadian rhythm. You're resetting your cortisol and your adrenaline, two chemicals that we're producing a lot when we're under stress. So you're kind of like bringing an intentional calm to your whole being, and you're feeding yourself, you're nourishing yourself, you're watering yourself like a good house plant, you're hydrating, and you're just taking a few minutes to feel how you feel. I found another really powerful thing about making that time throughout the day to feel how you feel is that stress can accumulate through the day. So let's say you're on the way to work, you're getting your kids out the door in the morning and you already have an argument with your partner, and then your kids are hard to get out the door. Then you're sitting in traffic and that little bit of road rage is coming up. Maybe you haven't even had breakfast, so you've gotten a cup of coffee. By the time you get to work, your day is first starting and you walk in and there's a pile of something to do, or, somebody's snarky or whatever. It's like by mid-morning, you can already have a whole list of stresses and grievances that just pile on through the day. So then what happens is we get stressed out. Then we want more sugar and we want more caffeine and we're more irritable. So we're not really taking care of ourselves. By the end of the day, we're like grabbing the 1 or 3 glasses of wine and the dessert. And then by the time we go to bed, we need like something to help us go to sleep. So it's another glass of wine or a sleeping medication, which so many people take now. And then those really don't help you sleep that much better. They maybe increase sleep by like 30 minutes a night. And so then you lay there looking at the ceiling and then your alarm goes off next morning and rinse and repeat. So each of those little touch points is a chance to decompress and say, okay, that happened, it's behind me. Or a chance to fix what's in your environment that's really stressing you out. Because you can start to notice patterns too. It's like, okay, every morning by 10 o'clock, I'm already so stressed out because this happened with my kids, or this happened with my partner, or this happened on the way to work. And like, how can you start to auto-correct some of those things that might be within your control? So big, long answer, but that I have found to be such a huge helpful tool.
Well, so when we engage these tools and techniques in our daily life, is it actually it's interrupting the
It is.
damage that could be done to our adrenals, but is it also reversing? Is it serving to reverse what's happening by bringing in a sense of calm and ease to our system?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So it's absolutely interfering with the process. You're totally interrupting that. But yes, so we have two halves of our nervous system. One is called the sympathetic, and that's where we get really activated and stressed out. It's what causes what we call fight or flight. Then we have this other part of our nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system. If you've ever done yoga and you're in shavasana at the end of yoga where you're laying down and you're like all blissed out, that's the parasympathetic nervous system. But it gets kicked in when you're petting your dog or watching a funny movie that makes you laugh or just relaxing in a hammock, if, metaphorically or literally. And when we take these touch points to step back from the stress and actually make a few minutes in our day each time to take some deep breaths, even if it's like 10 deep breaths, that engages that parasympathetic system. So it is cooling out that overactivated response. It's like pouring cool water on inflammation. The other thing is that there are other little triggers that can get that stress activated. And they're not even that little. One of the biggest triggers that gets the adrenal stress system activated is getting hungry or having blood sugar spikes and then crashes. So if you grab that muffin with sugar and have that coffee for your breakfast, your blood sugar goes up. And at first you feel like, okay, I got this. But an hour and a half later, you're crashing. What that triggers in your brain is this very primitive response of, oh no, there's a famine. This person isn't getting enough energy. And your brain, even when you're resting, uses about 25% of your body's intake of energy. So if your brain is getting depleted, it's going to go into DEFCON 1. It's going to say, 4 alarm fire, we need to make this person eat. And the first thing that you're going to eat is sugar and carbs or fat. Like, so the bag of chips or, the kind of Jason's peanut butter cups, because that's got the fat and the salt and, the sugar all in one.
All the food groups.
And it's got it all. And so that kind of gives you that feeling of calm because it's restoring the energy. But if you're taking touch points throughout the day to say, okay, I'm going to eat something that replenishes my energy. I'm going to eat something really healthy. Doesn't mean you can't have a Jason's peanut butter cup once in a while, but it's getting you out of that, like, I've got to have that now, to, okay, I'm a little hungry. I'm going to have a good snack. And then if you want the peanut butter cup later, you have it. When you keep your brain out of that survival mode by staying energized, that also pulls you back from those problems with the adrenals and actually starts to heal them. So all of it can be very therapeutic. The other thing is, as you start to get aware of the things that are triggering your stress and you take those out of your life to the extent that you can, like getting up 20 minutes earlier, if that gives you 20 minutes to start your day more healthy, actually may initially be like, I'm not getting up 20 minutes earlier. But if it gives you a slow start to your day, you're already backing away from that, what I call adrenal overdrive. So all of it's super therapeutic.
So, Aviva, you have mentioned, adrenals and cortisol, and I'd like to know how we can really inform ourselves about the hormones and chemicals that are coursing through our bodies and what to look for in terms of keeping them balanced, because there's also estrogen to think about. We hear a lot about oxytocin and the bonding hormone and all that. How can we make sense of it for ourselves?
So we produce like 50 hormones at least every day, and they're all interacting in such complex and interesting ways. So there are a lot of things that you can do to learn more about hormones. There are websites. I've got my book, The Adrenal Thyroid Revolution, which really gives a deep breakdown of what's going on with the adrenals, adrenaline, cortisol, thyroid hormones, oxytocin. But I think almost more importantly is to learn to pay attention to how we're feeling. And there are some really cool things in that a lot of the different hormones have very specific signatures, if you will. So adrenaline gives us that feeling of, it's, the excitement you get when you're on a roller coaster, and at the same time, the terror. Or that feeling that you have when you're watching, if you've ever watched a scary movie, particularly at Home Alone. Why anybody would do that, I don't know, but I have watched zombie movies at Home Alone. That feeling like you're sitting on the edge of your seat, you're scared and you're excited, and then all of a sudden you hear something in the other room, and it's like your senses are so alert that you could hear a pin drop. That's adrenaline. Cortisol gives you a feeling of being really it's like a well-being hormone. We think of it as a stress hormone, but it actually gives us this kind of slightly amped up, excited, but kind of even feeling. And so when it's all functioning well, you don't even really notice the effects of cortisol that much. You just notice that you feel well. Your immunity is at top flight. Your cognitive function is like you're sharp. Your focus is good. Your memory is good. With oxytocin, you tend to bond really well with other people. You enjoy connecting. Connecting gives you a sense of like elevated well-being. You feel really good and happy. And then with the other hormones like estrogen and progesterone for women, we know that those are working well when our cycles are on track. So if you're still in the years where you're still having a menstrual cycle, it's pretty much around 26 to 34 days. It doesn't have to be like clockwork, but your range, it stays within your range pretty much every month. You have signs that you're ovulating. You're not having significant PMS or pain with your period. Like things are humming pretty well along. And testosterone, both for women and men, gives us a feeling of edge. Like we have a little bit of a positive competitive edge. And we feel at the top of our game in terms of our physical health, like our physical strength. So knowing that those things are, and our thyroid hormone, we know is on track when our metabolism is good, we're having regular bowel movements. I mean, there are other reasons that you might not be having regular bowel movements, but thyroid is a big one. Your mood is pretty healthy and happy. And in general, healthy mood is a sign that all the hormones are on track, because low progesterone can cause depressed mood and sleep problems. High estrogen can cause some agitation. High testosterone can cause you to feel more aggressive. Low adrenaline, low thyroid, low cortisol, any of those can cause you to feel anxious or depressed. But each of them also has a signature when they're not working optimally. So cortisol, for example, when you have too much cortisol, there's a whole set of symptoms that go with that. And one of those is being unable to fall asleep at night. Another is being stuck in what I call a negativity mindset. There's something called a negativity bias, where you tend to actually think that things are not going to go your way. Things are going to go wrong. You're looking for the other shoe to drop. That's actually a sign that your adrenals are activated. And we can talk more about that because that's part of where the fear picture comes in. Gaining weight around your middle. Anything to go along with your thyroid not working or your women's hormones not working, that can be because cortisol is elevated. There's a syndrome called tired and wired, where you lay down at night to go to sleep and you're exhausted. Like, you're exhausted, but even with your eyes closed, you feel like the lights are still on. Your brain is still humming. Being unable to wake up easily in the morning, or when you wake up, you're still tired. Energy crashes, those energy crashes at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. These are just some of the very common symptoms that we see with too much cortisol. When cortisol's been high for too long, your body tries to protect you from the over effects of it by hitting the brakes on your adrenals. Your brain tells you to hit the brakes on the adrenal production of cortisol. It's not truly adrenal fatigue, but that's what a lot of people call it. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, you can just become really exhausted, really depleted. You start to say things like, I'm really burnt out, or I'm at the end of my rope. You often start to get sick more often than you used to. You may find that you have recurrent urinary infections or yeast infections, or sometimes this is when people tip over into an autoimmune disease like Hashimoto's or another of the autoimmune diseases. So that would be too much or too little cortisol. Too too much adrenaline, you start to feel agitated, what we call hypervigilant. It's like that feeling of watching the scary movie and being aware of every sound. But it's like you jump at loud noises. You're really irritable. You're really agitated. You can't really calm down and relax. The flip side of that is, again, your brain and your body have incredible innate wisdom. So to protect you from the downstream effects of too much adrenaline, which can be things like high blood pressure, irregular heart rhythm, really serious anxiety, really serious sleep problems, your brain also says, okay, we're not going to produce as much adrenaline. But the thing about adrenaline is it partly gives us drive and excitement. So the flip side is when you start to have too low adrenaline, you can feel depressed and you can have a hard time getting motivated. So it might be, for example, you want to go back to school or you want to start a business, but like you just can't seem to get your mojo going about it. It's like it's just not happening. Sometimes that happens when cortisol and adrenaline start to get depleted. With the women's hormones, I mean, anything, it's like fair game for pretty much anything. Fertility problems, menstrual irregularities, breast cysts, breast tenderness, all the way down the line to fertility problems, polycystic ovarian syndrome. There's a lot of connection between cortisol and thyroid and cortisol and blood sugar. So that can also affect things like polycystic ovarian syndrome and insulin resistance. It gets really involved. So I think the most important thing is to be aware of what is going on in your body. And, for some women, some people, health struggles have been part of their whole life. So you might not even really know what normal feels like. But if this is new, like if you've been pretty healthy and pretty happy and things have been going pretty well, and now you're having new symptoms, either time, like if something's not right, like you've never really quite felt well. You look at other people and you're like, yeah, I don't have that kind of happy mood, or I've always been anxious, or I've always struggled with my weight or my immune system or whatever it is. Or if they're new, that's when it's really good to start to catalog what the symptoms are that you're having. What's the disruption that's going on in your life? How do you feel? And get together with someone who can help you put the pieces together with those symptoms and what the hormone imbalances are. And sometimes it's just really connecting the dots on the symptoms. And you can say, oh, it sounds like this is what's going on. So a woman can come to me and say, Dr. Aviva, I've gained 15 pounds in the last 6 weeks and I haven't changed my diet or my exercise. I'm tired all the time. My hair is getting thin. I'm constipated. I feel cold and just terrible all the time. That's a kind of a dead ringer for a thyroid problem. So sometimes, we can check labs and confirm it, and sometimes it's a little more obvious what the imbalance is. But of course, like with thyroid, you do want to check labs because sometimes medications are needed. But really the big thing is start to pay attention to your body and listen to how you feel. And a lot of us have been taught to completely ignore how we feel. I think from the time we're little, from the time we're little, we're told we can't go pee in school unless we raise our hands. And a lot of people are embarrassed to do that. So they start to hold it. Or a lot of people are unable to go to the bathroom and have a bowel movement, even when they're little kids at school. So over their life, they start to ignore their digestive system. A lot of women, there are very few women that don't struggle with some form of disordered eating, where we think too much about our food and how it's going to influence our weight. And so we start to get confused messages about, are we hungry? Are we full? What are we hungry for? So I think just as much as we can get quiet and start to learn to respect those messages that our bodies are giving us, that's where the information is. And then someone with knowledge about what that means can help you put all the pieces together.
There was so much in that response. I just want to take you back.
Unpack it a little.
Yes, let's do some unpacking. So you touched on permission, as little kids needing to raise our hands to go to the bathroom. Even now, I'm thinking about, we have deadlines to meet. There are meetings, there are, obligations. And so I'm not going to have this eight glasses of water here at work because that's going to keep me going to the bathroom every few minutes. So I'm going to stay at work and get it done. And we have this, it's almost like a badge of honor to sort of suffer through and to show up and do our best and all, and to lean in and have our best lives, and, be all of that. So can you talk a little bit about the cultural sort of influence on our bodies and the self-permission that we are able to access as a result? Because we see a lot of people in the media, a lot of leaders and women in particular who say, hey, here's how you can have it all and never drop the ball. And in fact, trying to sort of translate that from what seems to be a perfectly polished life down to our own seems like there's more, guilt or misgivings because, how am I going to be able to achieve my dreams when I can't even do these simple, 7-step programs that this media mogul is able to do, all while having perfect hair and makeup.
Totally. There's so much to unpack in that. Too.
Right.
So, oh my gosh. So culture. I mean, the bottom line is every society decides what its values are. And then the people in that society end up sort of unwittingly living by those values. So for example, Bhutan, which is a tiny little country in, Eastern country in Asia, actually, instead of measuring their per capita income, they actually have a per capita happiness measure. So they have a completely different value system than we do in what they're measuring the success of their culture. Or if you look at a lot of the Scandinavian cultures, they value 6-hour work days and have even experimented with 4-day work weeks because they value quality of life. If you look at Europe largely, not to idealize anywhere else, but if you look at European countries in general, many of them have very extensive vacation times. We in the US are the only country in the world where our citizens, by and large, do not even use up all of their paid vacation time. So we're working more than we have to. And we live in a culture where we are constantly sold on buying things. And what's really sad to me is as I've watched this wellness industry become as I've watched the wellness movement become what many of us are now calling a wellness industrial complex, it used to be that it's pretty obvious when you're getting sold on something, right? You turn on the TV, there's a commercial for Coca-Cola or a car or a pharmaceutical, it's an advertisement. And even though it may influence you somewhat, it's an advertisement. But those of us who are interested in wellness follow all these wellness people. And what we don't know is that beautiful setting that they're in, they have enough social media followers that somebody has actually paid them $10,000 to go to that beautiful spot in Mexico and stay at that gorgeous hotel and has dressed them in those clothes and fed them their food. And so they're getting paid. And you're being sold, one, on a lifestyle that's not normally achievable. And two, you're being sold on whatever products are in that. So often, and there's this one influencer who has this incredibly beautiful home. And she is featured in wellness sites. And one day she posted a picture of herself because she follows me and I follow her on Instagram. And she was standing in front of the mirror in her very chic major city townhouse, which in itself had to be like a $10 million renovation. And she's wearing this beautiful outfit. And I know clothing pretty well. Mm-hmm. And so I did a quick mental calculation based on the designers that she was thanking. And I said to my husband, she's wearing $16,000 worth of clothing in her blouse, her pants, her shoes, and her jacket. I didn't even count her jewelry. And I'm like, we're following this as human beings, and this is setting a standard for either internal dissatisfaction or actually feeling like we have to make that kind of money to have those things because that's the new version of wellness. And a lot of these wellness influencers now are being paid by fashion companies and car companies, and, the list goes on. But the thing is, it's not clearly advertising. So it's much more subliminal and it's much more insidious. And it creates this feeling like we always have to do more. We always have to be more beautiful. Frankly, we often end up feeling like we have to be tall, thin, and blonde and white. And it's like standards that are like the 0.1%. And those people might not even be able to afford the things that they're wearing or marketing or the way that they're living. And one thing that's really interesting is being a physician who has written books and has a social presence. I have a certain level of part of my patient population, which is some of those influencers who come to me. And it's like you see the back end of things. And yes, there are people who do have wonderful, very well balanced lives. But by and large, most people are struggling to keep it all together. And so we get fed this standard, and then add to that, like our diets always have to be cleaner. They always have to be greener. We always have to be on some quest to be better at something, better listeners, better meditators, better at Marie Kondoing our house and getting rid of our stuff, better at decorating, because now wellness is incorporated into all this lifestyle stuff. So it's what you wear. Is it green enough? Is it organic enough? Is it slow fashion? It's like, it gets to be so much. And then you just add to that your regular life, right? Like a lot of people are going to social media for relaxation as a diversion from the stress that they're already feeling. So we're constantly sold on what we need to buy and how we need to be better. And I think as women and as human beings, we're already struggling with so much of a sense of we're not good enough and we're not doing enough that we end up exhausted. So for me, I actually had an interesting experience about 5 years ago or so. Backstory on me is very quick. I grew up in a housing project in New York City. And part of how I got out of that housing project was I was really academically skilled. And so I actually got a scholarship to go to college at 14 and left home at 15. And for me, part of what was also like what I learned as the backstory that can happen for a lot of people is that things that create safety for you. Let me just back up and say our adrenals and our whole brain stress response system is activated by anything that makes us feel unsafe. It can be unsafe economically. It can be unsafe in your body because someone at home touches you or treats you improperly. It can be unsafe because you had a parent who abandoned you or passed away, or who was emotionally unstable, had mental health problems, an addiction problem. It can be even something that you imagined happening that frightened you. It can be a physical trauma that you had as a teenager, an adult, anything that gets your brain to see something as fear creates activation of this system. Anything that we do that creates security or safety helps to turn that system down. It turns the volume down and it makes us feel more comfortable. So for me, as an example, being really smart and demonstrating being really smart got me out of a housing project and into college at a really young age. It created safety for me. But it also created a sense for me that I always had to do more and I always had to achieve more. And about 5 years ago, I had a life experience that kind of turned the lights on for me and turned off the anxiety stress response that was always driving me, because I actually had a moment where I realized that, yes, I like to accomplish things and I like to achieve things, and I'm all about changing the world and doing my little part of it, but that there was a part of that that was being driven by an old fear. And for a lot of people, that adds to this stress response. It adds to the feeling that I can walk into a room of 500 women that I'm teaching and say, or 500 people, it doesn't have to be women. I tend to work with women in my medical practice. That's why I default there, but it can be men too, or non-gender identified, trans, cis, anything you are, it can affect you. And I can walk into a room of 500 people and say, how many of you can be watching a movie or Game of Thrones or anything, but there's some part of your brain, bigger or smaller, that's saying, I should be doing something else. I should be working right now. I should be doing something. And I kid you not, like 500 hands will go up in a split second. It's like everyone feels they should be doing more. And it's like we're economically stressed, so we feel like we should be earning more. We have these past childhood or trauma drives that make us feel like we're not safe. And then, you're watching TV and commercials come on that make you feel like you should be buying more. And it's really endless. So for me, about 5 years ago, when I had this, it was really an epiphany. I had this term that came to mind, and it was permission to pause. And I realized, back to your word permission, that we all have the right to be human beings, but most of us have become human doings. We're always doing something or feeling like we should be doing something. And so how do we get it? And it really is, it's about getting back into our body. How do we become a human being? How can I just sit here, relax, enjoy the moment, be present, not think about the future, not think about the past, just for a few minutes right now. And I started to build this permission to pause much more significantly into my life. And it has really transformed a lot of things for me because, for one, it's helped me to clarify my priorities. If I don't have permission to stop and breathe and taste my food while I'm eating it, or be with my kids when I'm with my kids or my partner, or just kick back and watch a movie, something's really out of balance in my life. And the reality is that we actually don't lose productivity when we give ourselves permission to pause. Every single sociologic, business, mental health study has shown that when we take more time to relax, when we take those times out, when we give ourselves permission to pause, our creativity goes up, our productivity goes up, our enjoyment of our work goes up, and our errors go down, and we get more done in less time. So it's a win-win all around. So that's a big piece for me in my life. And, if listeners, watchers take away anything, it's like really reflecting on that you have permission to pause in your life.
And thank you for that, because because sometimes we need to hear that from sources outside of ourselves. And I wanted to touch on that a little bit too, about how outside factors can drive our behaviors and stories of fear. And, in our culture, in American culture anyway, and in many places around the world, there is a dominant narrative that, they are coming to take your stuff, or,
yes,
you're not safe. And those people who don't look like you, think like you, have your same series of experiences are not to be trusted. And so even with all of the wellness, best intentions, there is still a message of fear and alienation that's happening around us and crowding in on us. And so I wonder what you might suggest in terms of really coming back home to the body and creating safety when it does feel so unsafe in those sort of large or broad stroke sort of scenarios.
Yeah. So there's some really interesting phenomena that happen in the brain. We have this little tiny part of our brain. We have one on each side, right about in here, but inside the brain, called the amygdala. Amygdala just means almond shaped. And there's these two little almond shaped parts of our brain that act as, if you will, kind of like surveillance cameras, both paying attention to what's going on in the outer world and paying attention to what's going on in your inner world. Then those are connected to another part of the brain called the hippocampus. And they're called that because hippo means horse, actually. And they're like seahorse shaped. That part of the brain catalogs all of our emotionally based experiences. So the amygdala is the center for recognizing anything that is a safety trigger or a danger trigger, really more accurately, in your life. And the hippocampus stores all that information. So if you had an experience growing up or at some point in your life where somebody did take your things or take your safety or take your space or take your body or anything that caused you lack of safety, your brain has actually cataloged that because your brain wants to make sure that you avoid that danger again. So if you were mugged, let's just say, we use an invasive example, but not the worst things that can happen. If you were mugged and that person smelled like cigarettes or smelled like a certain cologne or was wearing a certain article of clothing, let's use a hoodie as an example, because that's one of those profiling articles of clothing, right? People have been shot for wearing hoodies. Black men are shot for wearing hoodies. So let's just say, put all that together. Your amygdala is going to store that information. And your amygdala then, next time you see somebody with a hoodie, it could be like a basketball player on a court, coming onto a court. It can be like anybody. It could be a young Black man on the train, but it can be somebody who has no bearing on your safety, but your brain may register that. Or let's say you smell a certain perfume or a cologne of someone who was really traumatic or even unpleasant to you in your life. And the list goes on and on and on of things. It can be a parent who had depression and their expression was really flat. So if your partner gives you a flat expression, your partner might not be flat to you, but it might register all these alarm bells that get you activated and you're like, something's really wrong. So there are the things that have happened because of learned experiences that we store, but then anything that looks, acts, walks, smells like that can trigger it. Then it gets really complicated in that we are given from the time we're children messages in our culture of what is danger, right? So a hoodie is an example. Like I find that there's a really offensive, if you go to the movies, there's one of these video reels that happens, which tells you not to use your cell phone before the movie. And it happens to be a white guy, but it's a white guy wearing a hoodie. And I'm like, here we are given a message that somebody doing something wrong is wearing a black hoodie. Do you know what I mean? And it was probably just made racially fair because that would have just been like a disaster to really make it what people are programmed to be afraid of.
Yeah.
And so we get these messages fed to us in our culture all the time of what we should and who we should be afraid of. The brain also starts to create something that's called a negativity bias. And it works like this. If you aren't afraid of certain things, then you might not recognize them as danger. So your brain wants you to become heightened, have a heightened awareness of everything that could be wrong or could go wrong. So let's use, if you're a child in India, let's say you're a third grader in India, in Bengal, I think that's an actual place where the Bengal tigers are. And people are still actually eaten by tigers every year in Bengal, by Bengal tigers. So if you're a kid and you're in third grade and you're walking home with your best friend, also in third grade, and you're somebody who sees like there's something moving behind the bushes and it looks like maybe some yellow and black stripes. If your brain doesn't recognize that as a problem, you are not going to see that there's a tiger behind there. So your brain has some primitively primed things that should recognize certain dangers. The problem is when our brain gets into that mode, it starts to see everything as a danger. And so you start to build up a lot of anxieties. And so, for example, let's say you had a lot of financial struggle as a kid growing up or as an adult. Any time that you have to spend money or anything that has to do with money might be a real trigger for you. If you had to move a lot as a kid, moving can be a real trigger for you, or making new friends or going into new social settings can be a trigger for you. If you were bullied some point in your life, then somebody, a group of people who may be like interviewing you for a job can feel like is a trigger. So it's a really, there are many, many things that we can do to unwind and reset. And even seemingly simple things like meditation, keeping our blood sugar balanced, spending time around people we love, because oxytocin, which you mentioned earlier, is actually a hormonal antidote to some of these stress reactions. But then also starting to become mindful of when you are being triggered. So if you notice a pattern of every time you see somebody wearing a certain article of clothing, or every time you have to spend money. If you can start to do the work of journaling, for example, journaling is a great way to start to unpack some of these things on your own. Or if it's really a pattern for you, working with a therapist can be a really powerful thing. Brené Brown talks about, I forget the phrase that she uses, but there's an expression that she uses for that feeling that the other shoe is always going to drop. And a lot of people feel afraid when something good is happening to them, that something bad is going to happen. And so we get stuck in not letting good things happen in our life because we're so familiar with the fear that happened for a reason. Maybe there was an actual loss, or that's just sort of that protective negativity bias, right? It's the way that you're going to protect yourself from something bad happening by not taking chances on things. It gets really bound up in sometimes being unable to take a financial chance on yourself by starting a new business, or taking a risk and moving to that new job, or falling in love because it's hard to trust that person. And that is all that fear survival response. The beauty is it's been there to help you, but now it might not be helping you anymore. It might actually be getting in your way.
Well, and so I love how you're responding, because it's going right into my next question. About moving from fear to freedom, because as I've always understood the negativity bias, it was, kind of installed in us way back in the caveman time, and we're actually always searching for a threat in order to survive, right?
Exactly.
Because the people who weren't looking for the threats didn't survive. And so now that we have other sort of stimulus to take the place of, the saber-toothed tiger or whatever, how do we then work with imagined fear, or those things that sort of take us into a fear response, in order to acclimate ourselves to the good things that are happening to us? Because if I'm overwhelmed by suddenly I have a rush of good things happening, and my old brain is interpreting that as, this is a threat to my system, I could die.
Exactly.
How even though it's something that's very good for me, how do we work or allow ourselves to kind of open that receptivity to the good, so that we can move toward freedom and abundance that you speak of?
Yes. So the first thing is to just be aware of how you feel. Like, that self-awareness and that body awareness is the most powerful tool we have to recognize when we're in it. So I think we all know what fear feels like. It's that feeling of, the phone ringing at the wrong time of night. It's the middle of the night, and you're like, is it my mom? Is it my kid? Is it, my kid who's off in college? What is it? Or that feeling of being in a parking garage alone at night as a woman, and you hear footsteps and you're the only one there. And like that feeling that it's like a pit in our stomach. Maybe it feels like we got the wind knocked out of us. Our breathing stops or becomes really shallow. We become really tight and contracted. We become hyper aware. We know what those feelings are. And a lot of that is the kind of feeling or associated feelings that we get when we're in that fear response. And that's telling you that the fear response is activated. Now, of course, we don't want to ignore it, because if you are in a situation where there's danger, that fear response is important for getting you acclimated to what's going on. But even then, it doesn't necessarily help you respond in the most effective and conscious way. But if you're not in danger right in the moment, even though it really does feel like I'm going to die right now. I know I'm going to die. And if you have panic attacks, it just, it's like that on steroids, right? Mm-hmm. So the first thing is feel how you feel, and just pay attention to how fear shows up for you. Is it racing thoughts? Is it like, oh my gosh, something's going to happen to one of my kids, or something's going to happen to my partner, or my house is going to burn down? Like, what are the thoughts really? And what are the physical sensations? Because the more you can start to become aware of them, you just recognize, okay, this is a fear right now, but nothing bad is happening. And this fear does not mean something bad is going to happen. A lot of people, especially if they're paying attention to their intuition, confuse fear and intuition and think, oh, I'm having this feeling, I definitely should not accept that job. And intuition tends to be different than fear. Intuition is more like a flash of insight, where fear is actually that, you shut down, or you want to run, like you just want to bolt. That's another way that fear can show up. And so first, pay attention. The next thing is a little bit odd, but roll with me on this. It's actually just take a few deep breaths, like right in that moment that you feel the fear. It's like a really deep breath in through your nose, even to the count of to the count of 4, and then a big exhale to the count of 8. And I like to repeat that 4 times. 4 is just my favorite number. So I'd say 4 times. It can be 6, it can be 5, it can be 8 times, whatever you like, and whatever it takes to start to get you to feel like you're in your body. Because fear kind of like, it's a body sensation, but it kind of jettisons us out, right? And then this is the counterintuitive part. Actually thank the fear. And while you're starting to calm down, thank the fear for its presence. Thank you, fear, because for whatever reason you're showing up right now, you helped me at some point in my life to survive. But I'm okay. So I've got this now. I can take it from here. And it's really starting to have a dialogue. It's almost like your inner wisdom is having a dialogue with the fear and saying, I'm good. And really what that is that's your safety sense. Like you're starting to create a sense of safety. And once you start to create that sense of safety with the deep breathing and being in that moment of, I can appreciate this, I can thank you, I've got it, you're not in the fear response anymore. And so the more you do that, you start to retrain your brain. The beautiful thing about all of this wiring is that in some ways it's hardwired, but in other ways you can rewire the feelings and start to shift yourself out of that connection between the thoughts and the experience and that sensation. There's an expression in neurobiology, so the study of how our nervous system works, which is what is wired together fires together. Mm-hmm. And so if fear and certain triggers are wired together, you can actually start to retrain them by breaking the habit. It's like breaking a spell. And that fear is like you're stuck in a spell. And then you're like, I'm okay. And the more you can say I'm okay to yourself and really feel it, like you can't just be like, I'm okay, I'm not okay. But it's like that breathing, the dropping the shoulders. Another thing is just to feel your feet on the ground, to actually feel your body and to recognize that you are okay right now. Then the next time you get that sensation, you can get out of it a little quicker. The next time, a little quicker. Now, this doesn't mean that if you had a significant trauma in your life, that it's never going to bother you again, that something's not going to trigger it. But it's a little bit like this. If you have a sugar craving, let's just say you have a crazy sugar craving, it's because you're hungry for something, but it doesn't mean you have to go eat a bag of M&Ms. You can recognize the feeling and recognize what your body really needs, and you can eat something healthy, and then the craving goes away because what your body really needed was energy. So maybe you eat some nuts, or you eat, I don't know, a hard-boiled egg, or you eat some hummus and some vegetables, but it gives you the energy you need. And you're like, your body and your brain are like, okay, I got what I needed. I don't have to be in that crazy drive for sugar. And it's the same thing. You're giving your body what it needs. You're giving your brain what it needs, which is a sense that you're safe.
Can you talk about, as we continue this conversation about safety?
Yes.
When you mentioned, the fear of someone taking something from us, or whether we have been, victimized or traumatized in some way, that can really serve to drive a wedge between in our relationships to our bodies. Can you talk about the role of maybe forgiveness or trust or whatever it is that we need to do to then come back in to create that safe space and to let ourselves off the hook for any sort of guilt or negative feelings that we've had about being at home in our bodies, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I really, really resonate with what you said about letting ourselves off the hook. And I think that's the first place to start. And I think that's why thanking the fear also is so important, because this isn't something that you did to yourself. This is a much greater influence of something that either happened to you when you're young, or I really want to acknowledge too, that for some people, the world actually isn't safe. I was listening to Barack Obama talking after, I think it was after Trayvon Martin's shooting. He was giving a speech, like a state of address. And he said, I have been in a department store, and before I was president, was pulled over in the department store and had my bags looked through. I have been driving, even as an official in the state of Chicago, in the state of Illinois, and have been pulled over by a police officer just because of the color of my skin and my gender. And I think for people of color, for women, for any group of people where the culture itself actually creates endemic, inherent lack of safety, turning
the dominant
off
culture, you mean?
The fear. What's that?
The dominant culture, you mean?
Yes, the dominant culture. It makes it that I think fear is so internalized that it becomes a way of life. And we don't even know what it's like not to be afraid. And there are really good reasons to be afraid. The problem is that the fear doesn't change the culture. The fear just makes that person sick. And it reminds me of a quote I read. I think it's a quote attributed to Buddha or attributed to the Dalai Lama, which is, being angry is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And there are really big reasons that people are afraid. And there are really legitimate reasons that people are afraid. But what's saddening is that fear leads people to have behaviors. Some of them are really important behaviors, right? Like teaching our children, if you're in a certain demographic group, not to run away from the police or put your hands in your pockets, or a woman not walking on certain streets that don't have street lights at night, So there are things that we all have to maybe adapt to because they're just problems. The problem is, though, that when we internalize the fear as part of our biology, because fear does become biology, we see in certain communities outrageous rates of depression, drug addiction, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, suicide, homicide. Amongst women doctors, for example, the suicide rates are astronomical right now. They're some of the highest suicide rates in the country because that dominant culture makes it very difficult for women to be healthy human beings in medical training and in medical practice. So it drives anxiety and depression. So I almost feel like, Audre Lorde, she was an incredible philosopher, poet, feminist, and said, I won't do justice to her quote, but she said that self-care is not selfish. It's an act of self-preservation and social warfare. And it's so important, I think, for us to learn how to take care of ourselves in spite of, or to spite the culture in a way. And by starting to take care of ourselves, we can start to get healthy enough and it's almost like it is an act of social disobedience to say, I'm not going to let consumerism drive me to work all the time and think I have to buy everything on Amazon, or I'm not going to let racism, even though it affects my life in ways that I can't get away from, make me sick. I'm not going to let myself take that out on my own body. Or sexism, I'm not going to not apply for that job. I'm not going to not stand up for myself. I'm not going to say me too. I'm not going to not say me too because I'm afraid. And it takes tremendous acts of courage to do that. And I have so much respect for people who are really able to make that public. But I feel that fear is really, it's eating up our culture right now. And then these 24-hour news cycles, I mean, these are known to be phenomena that were created to drive fear and drive consumerism and drive political bias. So as much as we can start to separate ourselves from, I'm not saying we have to go live on an island somewhere, but not buy into so much of the message of the dominant culture, not spend so much time on social media, spend more time outside in nature, which has been shown to help reverse adrenal stress and heal our bodies, or spend more time talking with each other instead of looking down at our phones. Spend more time doing acts of service. Forgiveness is one that is really hard. And I kind of bring it back to that piece that the Dalai Lama or the Buddha is attributed to saying, that anger and being a self-poison. I can't speak for everyone, because I think that there are a lot of reasons that people are angry. And I think that anger is actually a very powerful social motivator. And I think that the more we suppress our emotions, they're still there, we're just suppressing them, the more we actually activate that stress response. So it's not about calming real emotions. It's not about being relaxed and pretending that social ills aren't happening. It's how can we replenish ourselves? How can we stay healthy? And if forgiveness is something that I think is wonderful if you can get to that point, but it's not always something that just, somebody perpetrated a crime against you and I forgive them. I think that to forgive, in as much as that you're not drinking the poison anymore. Because if you're constantly in that state of hatred and constantly in that state of targeted anger towards someone, but aren't doing something in your life, then it's just poisoning you. So I don't know that everybody deserves to be forgiven for everything, or that not everything can be forgotten, or that I don't know that forgiveness means that you have to be around that person or that situation, right? Like you don't have to put yourself in a situation that was a threat to you or may still be a threat to you because you've forgiven someone. But I think if you can forgive in terms of letting go of that emotion that's burdening you, and then if you can get to the next step of love is so healing, right? I mean, Martin Luther King talked about it. Gandhi talked about it, that healing power of love and transformation, but still keeping yourself safe, right? Having healthy boundaries is such an important part of taking care of ourselves. Having healthy boundaries is the ability to say, no, I've got so much on my plate right now that I can't say yes to one more thing. Or healthy boundaries is, I am going to enjoy that ridiculous sitcom just because I deserve to have permission to pause. And healthy boundaries also means I'm not going to be around that family member who did something horrible to me as a kid, or did something horrible to my mother, or I'm not going to be at that party where that ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend or ex-boss is, right? So I think forgiveness in a way that's healthy for you. And forgiveness definitely can start to rev up those healthy hormones that calm us down. That makes sense. It was a long answer, very philosophical, more than I expected to be, but I think the social parts of it are so complex,
As are we as individuals and collectively, and I love that the self-care is also an act of radicalism, right? And resistance. And when I was talking about forgiveness, I was actually thinking of forgiveness of the self. And I appreciated where you went with that for sure. And I thought about, the ways that as we come back home to the body, we realize, it hasn't been safe to be here. And I've had a hand in making it unsafe. And I recognize where I might have abandoned myself over the course of the years. And so that sort of forgiveness as a way to continue to return to the self, as opposed to
Absolutely. I feel like self-love and forgiveness. I sometimes think about the way we talk to ourselves.
Yes.
Right? Like how many women walk past, or men probably too, walk past a mirror and just like, ugh, look at your thighs, or, oh my God, your belly. And we would never talk to our best friends like that. Or, oh my gosh, you're such a loser. Nobody would ever want to be with you. Or, of course you got fired from that job.
Right.
Suck at everything you do. But like, we talk to ourselves that way all day long. We have hundreds of these, what are called automatic negative thoughts or self-critical thoughts. And a lot of times they're not even our own voice. They're just like things we picked up along the way, or expectations from the culture. And to me, it starts with, if I were my own best friend, how would I talk to myself? Because we're so compassionate. Our best friends call us when they're in trouble because they know we'll give them the truth, but we're going to do it with so much love, and we're going to be so kind, and we're going to remind them of their best self. And we're going to remind them, it's not your fault. This is not your fault. And that self-forgiveness, self-love is, we all need big doses of it every day.
Don't we though?
So true.
We have time for one final question, and I want to go right back to the title again, to a piece of it. You were talking about keeping ourselves from living the life we want and taking chances on our dreams, and how adrenal fatigue and overwhelm and all that stuff contribute to those factors. But I would like you to take us out with a little visual of what it looks like when we move from fear to freedom and abundance and confidence in going for our dreams.
So for me, it feels like the word that comes to me is alignment. So I'm in the present. I'm in the present moment. I'm feeling how I'm feeling in my body. I'm having thoughts that are congruent with, this is exciting, or this is something I want, or a sense of, this isn't right for me right now. So I can feel confident saying no. A friend of mine coined the term calmfidence. So CALM, confidence. It's to Alex Jameson, who wrote the book Women, Food, and Desire. And she was the co-producer of Super Size Me, that movie about Morgan Spurlock and the hamburgers. And so she coined the term confidence. And I feel like that's what that sense of being able to go for success is. It's that trust in the moment, in how you feel, without spinning out in all the directions we can spin out. The what if, or I should have, or I shouldn't, or really those kind of fear voices, the anxiety voices. So it's a sense of, you might not really know what it is you want right now, or what success looks like to you, but it's opening up to the creative space, to the imagination, to flow, to being able to dream the what if in a positive way, right? Like there's a great expression, what if we believed our hopes and doubted our fears instead of the other way around? And it's a really powerful way to start to look at life and to be able to trust that you can take a chance on something. You're still going to be okay. It's sort of taking the word failure and the fear out of going for that, whether it's going back to school or starting a business or saying yes to a relationship that you're excited about. And it's trusting the excitement. It's not doubting the excitement. It's not being in the excitement and then like, if I get excited about this, something terrible is going to happen. It's learning to really stay in the moment. And I think I heard a statistic once. I did a training program, a week-long training mind-body program at Harvard. And many years ago, there was a statistic that most of us spend about 40% of our time regretting the past, 50% of our time worrying about the future, and 10% of the time actually being in the present. And when we get into the present, we actually start to feel our bodies and feel comfortable in our bodies. And I think it's from that place of stillness that we start to establish a sense of quiet. We start to hear those inner voices a little bit more that guide us. And I really, truly believe that we all have a very powerful inner wisdom. There have been studies that have looked at people who trust their gut. So for example, stockbrokers who trust their gut and make the bet when their gut tells them to, and don't make the bet when their gut tells them not to, compared to stockbrokers who are like, nah, I don't listen to that gut stuff. And across the board, those brokers have better outcomes. There have been studies that have looked at physicians who trust their gut versus physicians who don't trust their gut. And trusting their gut always leads to a better outcome. But the thing is, we have to get quiet enough to start to recognize, okay, that's my inner voice talking. When we say gut, it's like that inner voice. And there's a term called interoception. Interoception is the physiologic term that means that our body's physical messages are actually giving us valuable, important information. So I'd say being in the present, starting to get quiet enough to hear the voice, which sometimes means taking a bath or a long shower or sitting and sipping a cup of tea or sitting outside somewhere, anywhere that brings you stillness or any activity that brings you stillness, and just give yourself some time to listen. It's in that permission to pause that innate wisdom, that knowing starts to bubble to the surface. And the more we listen, the more we recognize that voice.
Next step, abundance.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Oh, speaking of abundance, thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. What a wonderful conversation with you.
Total pleasure. You're such a great interviewer and so many insights and such a beautiful, bright face, too.
Oh, I thank you so much. And right back at you. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your time and your just teaching, really.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
That has done it for us today with Dr. Aviva Romm, and I want to thank all of those who were able to join us for this session. Please note the recording of our session will remain accessible for free for 24 hours. And if you wish, you can purchase the entire summit with lifetime access to each recording, transcripts from each session, and bonus gifts from our presenters. For Sounds True, I'm Christy Peoples, here with Aviva Romm, thanking you once again for being with us. SoundsTrue.com, waking up the world.